Let me turn off our music here. Welcome you all to the last open classroom of the semester. Thank you all for coming. I see a lot of faces that I've seen many times before, so particularly thanks to those of you who have been loyal attendees this semester. They say every end is also a beginning, and it certainly is the case with the open classroom. I hope that we'll also see you next semester when we're going to be doing, no, we're not doing globalization. We're going to be doing policy advice to the next governor. I will not be with you next semester. We're looking for, still trying to figure out exactly who's going to be running that. But it promises to be an exciting program, and I hope you'll all be able to make it. Also, some of you may remember Professor Barabasi, who spoke to us earlier this semester. His new book is out, and there's going to be a public talk on the book that you're all invited to. And you can see the RSVP there on the screen. Tonight, we're going to be talking about, in the global era with global media, crises become global, as do crisis aid, and tonight we're going to be hearing from a group of journalists who covered the crisis in Haiti. Our professor from the journalism school, Steve Burgard, has put together a great panel for us, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to him now.
Thank you. I want to welcome you. You know, Barry Bluestone and I were having lunch one day several years ago, and you know how Barry is. You've all gotten to know him pretty well. He's the kind of guy who has a ton of energy, even over a sandwich. And one of the things that we said was we really got to do some things between journalism and public policy, and that was the beginning, really, of kind of a collaboration and ideas and thoughts in our journalism program. We created a track in public policy. You know, we created a track for graduate students so that they could move back and forth between the two areas of governmental service and journalism. And then earlier this year, in one of the classroom presentations, we had an event, maybe some of you were here, on the future of the newspaper. And so I can't really take credit for putting this particular panel together, because the Globe itself had such a wonderful notion of putting together terrific work. The reporters and photographers, videographers from their staff in the Haiti crisis, they showed it internally in their own newsroom, and they thought maybe this was something that the larger world would like to see. We agreed, and so this is actually the second visit of this group to campus this year. We're very fortunate that they came and talked to some of our undergraduate students. So many of our students have already benefited from this. Now they're kind of in transition to this very early summer that we have in the Northeastern program. The leaves are barely on the trees yet, and everybody's departing for the summer. But it's a thrill to be able to bring this Globe group here for all of you in essentially what's an extension of the Open Classroom series. So our format will be a presentation by the panel of their work, and then when they're done, I'll come back out. We'll have some questions and answers. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Gideon Gil, the Health and Science Editor of the Globe. Gideon?
Thank you all for coming out tonight, for your patience with our audio visual technical difficulties. Before we get started, I just wanted to thank Professor Burgard and also Dean Bluestone and Bill Dickens and John Sarvey of the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs for hosting us. I also, without further ado, I want to introduce the reporters and photographers who were down to Haiti. I actually was up here in Boston helping to guide the coverage, but they were the ones that did the real nitty-gritty work on the ground. Why don't you guys take a seat at the table? From the far left there is Bill Greene, who's a photojournalist who went down to Haiti. And we actually worked in two teams. So Bill worked with Maria Sacchetti, who's sitting next to him. Maria's our immigration reporter. And next to Maria is Steve Smith, who covers public health, and Dina Rudick, who's also a wonderful photojournalist. And Steve and Dina work together. And basically, on January 12th, when the earthquake happened in Haiti that afternoon, we started getting reports trickling into our newsroom. There were rather sketchy reports that came across the wires saying there had been a massive earthquake in Haiti. There was very little information. Maria, who is as our immigration reporter, covers immigrant communities here in Boston, got on the phone and started making calls to people in the Haitian community. And many of you may know, but Boston has the third largest Haitian community in the United States after New York and Miami. There are nearly 50,000, I think, is the Haitian Americans here. And so she started making calls and very quickly realized that there were lots and lots of people here in Boston with family down in Port-au-Prince who had no idea, had no way to reach them. Communications were down mostly. If they could get through, there was like a few seconds and then the line would go dead. And people were panicked. They needed information, and that's what we do. So, Maria came back, kind of came to her editors and said, I think we should go to Haiti. And we thought about it and very quickly decided that yes, this was a story that had very deep connection to Boston and many of our readers. And so the next morning, Maria and Bill headed down, and they'll tell you more about their trip. But then we also, Steve, who covers, as I said, covers medical community, knew that there were a number of disaster medical response teams based here in Boston. And in fact, we have a couple members of the team here tonight. We're glad to have you with us. He started making calls to those teams and found out that two of them were, in fact, going to be headed down to Haiti. And so we decided, and the fact that those two teams were here, and plus we knew that Partners in Health, which is based here, is one of the main providers of health care down in Haiti, that they would have a big role to play. We decided to send a second team down to write about the medical response. And so Steve and Dina went down the following day and to focus, and they embedded with one of the disaster medical response teams. So I'm going to now throw it over to Bill and Maria. Do you want to start off telling about your...
Well, initially, in covering something like this, the most important thing is time. I mean, it's leading the world wire. It's the #1 story in the world. So the first thing I did was to book us flights. Luckily, we had non-stop flights to Santo Domingo. Port-au-Prince airport was closed, so we got on an 11 o'clock flight that morning after we got clearance to go. Flew straight to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. We got there around 3. The charter companies were just starting to get flooded with journalists trying to get into the country. On the way down, we were talking, and I kept thinking, okay, we either can go overland by car, get there by water, by boat, or try to fly in. The water, a lot of people told me that going by boat was too dangerous. There's a lot of kidnapping and kind of piracy issues. Going overland at night was also extremely dangerous, and my main fear was we could get 5 miles from Port-au-Prince, and you don't really know, what you're going to find. To drive all night and then not be able to get in would be a disaster. So we were able to charter a flight with about 20 other journalists the next morning. Maria was great with her elbows moving up at the front of the counter the night before. We actually had to go to a second airport, like the domestic airport, and everyone was, you know, pushing and shoving journalists and waving $100 bills trying to get into Haiti. So the next morning, we had to spend the night at a motel, which was actually very beneficial because we ran into a wonderful American man who was born in Haiti, ran a hotel in San Domingo, fluent in Haitian, and he agreed he wanted to come. He said, "Can I come with you? And I'll translate, and I'll help." And we said, "Come." We can need all the help we can get. So the next morning we got on a flight, we got in, found a security cab driver. Usually what you do in a situation like this is you find a cab driver at the airport, you pay him whatever is fair, and you say, "We want you for the day." And we had Gary, our interpreter, and we just hit the ground running. Gary knew a place where we could stay. Believe it or not, we were able to find a motel on the outskirts of town that had room, although I think thanks again because Gary knew the owners. Electricity on and off of the generator. It had food and water. I mean, you're sort of preparing something like this to sleep out, go stay with an NGO, do whatever you can to get it done. But at the end of the day, that you're really worried about your safety, being sick, getting sick, not being able to work, and getting your material out. For a reporter, it's easier because they can always find a phone and dictate. Maria's cell phone worked, mine did not, but I was able to find a internet connection down at the airport for a few days, and was running down there, and the shipping company was letting me email photos. So we just got there, we dumped our stuff at the hotel, and we just went downtown, and it was unbelievable. But I'll turn it over to Maria at this point.
Because I cover immigration, I had heard from a lot of people that people were frantically trying to get in touch with their families. So the night before we worked and we tried to do a reaction story just about the need here for communication that was just so desperate. And then when we got on the ground, and Bill's being very modest, he can just drive around Haiti. He's been to Haiti many times before, and he's just been in all sorts of disasters. So it's great to have that sort of teamwork. I think we all appreciate that. You really do work as a team in those kinds of situations. And so I think it's sort of, I keep saying to people, a story like this is kind of, in many ways, the whole reason you become a journalist. Like, there's an urgent need. You know that there's no communication and there's no help. And the stories, a lot of people have asked me, how did you know what to cover? And it was very quickly for us, I think, a sequence of events. You knew that this horrible disaster had just happened. Knowing about Haiti, you knew that the infrastructure was very poor to begin with. And so this 7, as soon as I heard it was a 7, I knew it was going to be bad. And so, immediately, we went downtown, and you could see that people on top of piles of rubble, literally just fending for themselves. I mean, you knew the first story was going to be about trying to find survivors, but I think what we didn't expect was so many people just completely on their own, with picks and sticks and just that you could hear. And they were telling us in the beginning, voices from underneath the rubble, and then those voices faded. So it was really a race against time for them. So we wrote about that the first day, and then while I was writing, Bill went out with our translator, who incidentally went to Northeastern. Yeah, it's strange. And they found this hospital where people were. The hospital had collapsed, but they had set up a clinic in a house across the street, and people were dying on the street or bleeding on the street, and they weren't getting any medical assistance. And that was really stunning to see. I mean, to go to a place where you believe, we would run into parents who pulled their children from rubble and brought them to the hospital, thinking, at least somebody in with scrubs could help them, and there was nothing. And so, those kinds of stories you just can't write fast enough, and you feel like, you're playing a role, and people were, in spite of all their trauma and shock, people were really welcoming to us, and they wanted to tell their stories, and they really understood why we were there, and I felt that, I was really glad that we were there to write about those things and document those stories.
Bill, do you want to show the?
Sure.
We'll show your stuff, and then we'll come to the
This was a piece we put together. Is this the reporter's notebook?
Yep.
When we came back, I shot a lot of daily video. They're sort of on the cusp of figuring out how to shoot video in remote locations and sending it. And the way I was doing it was basically using a flip video camera and sending it. And I was shooting some a better grade video, thinking that when we came back, both teams put together sort of a reporter's notebook, something we never do. Kind of highlighting some of the stories we'd come across that we weren't able to, sort of touch on the general theme of what happened while we were down there.
Steve, why don't you pick up? Yeah.
So Dina and I had previously teamed up in 2005 to cover Hurricane Katrina, which was for me an introduction into working in that sort of tableau. Dina had that experience predating. She had been to the tsunami in Southeast Asia and had weathered that. And we worked, I'd like to think, famously together covering Katrina. And so when the editors asked us about going to Haiti, we embraced the opportunity to tell that story. But it was a fundamentally different experience than covering Katrina. And if you want to think of the just magnificent work that Maria and Bill did as very much sort of the 30,000-foot view. They were roaming across Port-au-Prince, and I think they've both been quite modest about just the scope of what they had to do in using their wits and ingenuity working in that environment. So if you want to think of what they did as the 30,000-foot view, we took, and perhaps appropriately enough as a health writer, we took sort of the electron microscope view. Our task was to look at the healthcare response and see it through the prism of healthcare workers, such as the folks who joined us tonight, who are veterans of this sort of disaster response, who go into this environment and really put their lives on the line to save other lives. And so we met up with the surgical response team on Thursday. So this is 2 days after the earthquake. Another team, the disaster medical assistance team, had departed earlier in the day Thursday. Its flight left maybe midday Thursday, and we'd hoped to be with them. But as journalists, we had to make a decision about personal issues and professional issues. So one of the issues that we had was that we didn't have malaria medication. And so we had to make the decision that we were going to go and get that medication. And doing that, and the folks at Mass General were terrific in accommodating us, took time. So we were not able to make the 1 o'clock flight with the disaster medical team. And instead, we went to Atlanta, where we were told that the surgical team, which is also based at Mass General, would be waiting. But we had no guarantee that we would be able to go with them. But it was an interesting example of how the sorts of relationships that you develop as a reporter, how important that connective tissue is. And it shows, I would like to think, how essential what we do as journalists remains, that because of the sorts of relationships we had with folks at Mass General, we were able to go there and say, hey, remember me from the time I did the story on thus and such? And they said yes, and we know that if you come with us, that you will show the sort of respect that the patients deserve. And that's really became a fundamental component of this, even as other journalists came to where the medical workers from Massachusetts were providing care. And so we waited with them, got on a flight on a Friday to Port-au-Prince, and then began really a sort of Kafkaesque odyssey that became emblematic, a microcosm in truth, for much of the response to the earthquake. that you had remarkably skilled people, emergency room doctors, surgeons, who for several days were just sitting on their bums because there were delays in supplies and then delays in security. And so what we spent, much to our surprise, the first few days doing was chronicling their wait. And you might think, geez, watching people wait is a bit like watching paint dry. But actually, it had a remarkable dynamic to be witnessing this, to be witnesses of what they were enduring. And we wrote quite aggressively about this. And particularly in the Sunday newspaper, there was a remarkable story that I would commend you to go back and read that Maria wrote and Bill photographed about these sort of commando medical workers from Massachusetts, not affiliated with any entity, who had come down on their own and plunged right in and were beginning to provide care. And so that contrasted with these organized teams, organized by the federal government, that were still waiting to be deployed. And it was a very sort of piquant juxtapositioning of what you had these medical workers from the same state, in one case doing because they were not working within strictures of government, and then a separate team, much larger team, that was waiting for supplies and then waiting for security. And so our story appeared that Sunday, and we were told that it reached the highest levels of the State Department, the Department of Defense, and you could tell palpably a change in the dynamic. And by the end of that day, about 5 o'clock in the evening, we did what we had done so many other times, which was to clamber into dump trucks. That was the mode of transit, and I will confess to being height averse. And so I sort of mastered the going up bit. The coming down part I wasn't so good at. And so that was the mode of transit. And so that at 5 o'clock on Sunday, the Massachusetts team was the only team to be dispatched for several days. And so we all hauled ourselves into the dump truck with all kinds of gear, went to the airport. There was a sort of remarkable scene in which one of the vehicles had been lent by the embassy, and the secretary of the ambassador at one point came out with a gun and said, "We need our truck back." And someone said, "Well, aren't we all sort of on the same team?" And it was an illustration of the grief that people were feeling. There had been members of the embassy whose lives had been lost, and the thinking was that this flatbed truck was needed to transport their remains. In subsequent reporting, it now appears that never happened, but here you had someone whose activities from the outside might seem villainous, but in fact was definitely sleep deprived, grief ridden, and despite the seeming greater good to be done, she was telling the leaders of the medical teams to unload this flatbed truck that had arguably the most pivotal component of all, generators. And so what are you going to do? How are you going to save lives if you don't have generators?
All right. Did you already explain what this is?
Yeah, I think so. Feel free to jump in.
Cool. This is a reporter's notebook. We have two of them. This is, as you know, we had two teams, Bill and Maria and Steve and myself. And this is sort of like it's an after-the-fact recap of the things that Bill and Maria encountered in words and video. So,
We'll push the wrong button.
okay, lights off. Wow.
It was apocalyptic in many ways. So the Haitian government was literally in shambles. people, kind of thugs that everyone was afraid of. But for the most part, it was very clear that people were there for food, and because they didn't have any. And people would tell us, look, if somebody would tell us where to go, we would go. And nobody was doing that. I think that was the frustration that people were experiencing on the ground.
The second day we were there, we went to a hospital. There were people literally lying on the street dying.